In light of Netanyahu's apparent focus on establishing regional dominance, will he manage to sway Trump towards escalating against Iran?
Well, I
And
think
of
that
course, sir, you can answer Mr. Roth because he answered you and he hailed what you said.
Mr. Roth and I have known each other for years. I agree with everything that he has to say with regard to putting Iran and checking Iranian influence. I mean, Iran supports Al Qaeda. Iran supports Hezbollah, the Houthis, and virtually every Islamist terrorist organization in the Middle East has an Iranian connection. And then also in our own hemisphere, you have Iran's involvement with Venezuela, its involvement in the drug trade with Hezbollah, and also it has its agents of influence inside the United States that President Trump and his administration will be looking at. However, when it comes to Netanyahu, I think that it depends on whatever the Iranian regime decides that it's going to do. If it decides to ratchet things up again, like it did last year, I think that President Trump will tell Netanyahu that he can take the gloves off and go after Iran's nuclear program. Now that you have evidence that the Iranians are building nuclear capable missiles that can hit Europe and potentially even farther.
Okay, sir, if I conclude what Mr. Roth said and what you said, now the main issue and the main focus between Netanyahu and Donald Trump is to get rid of Iran, and this is whereas everyone thinks, this is what I understand, and I want you to reassure, please, that the Gaza ceasefire is the main and most important issue between both leaders when they come to negotiate today.
Well, as far as President Trump is concerned, yes, because he campaigned on bringing peace to Gaza. However, as we've seen in prior ceasefire, Hamas always finds ways to rebuild its forces and to start the next provocation. So I think that we need to look at whatever Hamas decides and put pressure on Hamas through Qatar and Turkey and Iran.
Mr. Roth, your take, sir?
Well, Hamas is like a lizard. You cut off the tail and it grows back. You have to cut off the head, and the head is whoever's funding Hamas. And I think that there's broad agreement that most of that comes from Iran. And so you say the main focus, the reason for the meeting today between Trump and Netanyahu is to talk about Gaza. Yes, obviously Gaza is on the table. Gaza will be discussed.
But sir, on top of the priorities is Iran.
If they only talk about Gaza without talking about Iran, that's like talking about water leaking in through a windowsill when there's a huge hole in the roof. Iran is the core problem, and you use the word, I think, dominance. I don't think that Israel or anybody or the United States or anyone else is seeking dominance.
Sir, we've reached a conclusion here that Iran is the top of their problem and their negotiations. Mr. Roth, with Gaza's ceasefire talks at a very critical juncture, will Trump be able to maintain a lasting ceasefire agreement in Gaza, or will Trump wait for the second phase until all of the detainees are handed and then there's a war again?
I think the preference of the American electorate, and probably Mr. Trump's preference too, is that every American hostage, certainly, if not all of the hostages, every American who was taken hostage, if not all the hostages, are either released or accounted for, and if they're dead, we get the bodies. I think that is I don't think that the president has drawn that line in the sand, but I think, having watched him for many years now, that if that doesn't happen, it very easily could trigger a change in his attitude towards the ceasefire.
Mr. Rossomando, your take on what Mr. Roth said?
Well, I think that Iran is the center. You can't separate Iran from Hamas, because ultimately the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is the master that controls the puppet in Gaza. So I think that we have to do more about ending Hamas's rule in Gaza, because it will bring about the next war.
Okay, Mr. Rossomando, the question, it's your question. Will Netanyahu be able to secure Trump's endorsement of his reported plans to maintain a long-term occupation of parts of southern Lebanon beyond the 18th of February deadline, sir?
Well, I think that President Trump is somebody who's pragmatic. He'll listen to the arguments and then make a decision. If Prime Minister Netanyahu can give Mr. Trump evidence that withdrawing from southern Lebanon would be a threat to Israeli security, such as the resumption of rocket attacks and other Hezbollah military activities, then I think that he will be open-minded to that.
Okay, Mr. Roth, how do the differing priorities of Trump and Netanyahu on Iran and China impact their ability to craft a unified Middle East strategy, sir?
Well, it's very clear that everybody gets a vote. Everybody gets a voice. Everybody gets to decide what they want to do. And, China, Iran, Russia, they have their own opinions. They have their own desires, certainly. The Russians are, I'm sure, quite interested in how the new government is coming together in Syria. I think the Israelis would very much like to be able to have the border of Israel and Lebanon be the outer perimeter of their security zone and not have to extend into southern Lebanon. So all of the Israeli men and women who are away from their families and loved ones can go home. Nobody likes war. Nobody likes indiscriminate killing. People use it as a tactic. I think what you see from Donald Trump is a guy who would rather use economic pressure rather than military pressure. And the Chinese, the Russians, they're vulnerable to that. The Chinese economy may look strong right now, but number one, we're looking at Chinese government data, and that's not reliable. There is no independent economic data available to verify what the government claims. But number two, China's facing a huge demographic crisis. There aren't enough young, healthy, working Chinese able to support the rapidly aging Chinese population. And so Xi Jinping has got to look at how he acts to retain the Western investment that Trump and others are threatening to pull out of China, so that he will have.
Sir, do you think that Trump is playing the game with China based on what you're saying now?
I think that Trump has a long-term strategy. He has a long-term economic strategy. That I find that exciting. I find that preferable to a long-term military strategy, although the long-term military strategy is important. You can't neglect it. You can't avoid it. Ronald Reagan was right when he said peace through strength. But the idea of using economics, that we have leverage with the Chinese have leverage with us. They buy our debt.